The deep space research vessel Curiosity drifted silently through the Carina Nebula, its sophisticated sensors probing the cosmic dust for signs of the unusual energy signatures that had brought them 12 light-years from Earth. Dr. Elena Santos stood at the observation deck, her dark eyes reflecting the swirling purples and blues of the nebula, while her fingers danced across holographic displays. "Captain," she called out, her voice steady despite her excitement. "I'm picking up something strange. It's not the signature we were tracking. This is different. Structured. Artificial." Captain James Chen moved to her station, his weathered face illuminated by the soft glow of the displays. At 53, he'd seen enough of space to know that different usually meant trouble. "Show me." The holographic display expanded, revealing a complex waveform that pulsed with an eerily regular rhythm. It wasn't radio, wasn't light, wasn't any form of communication humanity had encountered before. It was pure vibration, space itself trembling like a plucked string. "It's a distress signal," Elena breathed, her fingers flying over the controls. "But the physics, it's impossible. They're vibrating space-time itself." Before Chen could respond, the ship's AI, Araya, interrupted. "Captain, multiple objects emerging from fold space. Configuration unknown. No match with any recorded human vessels." The observation deck's windows automatically polarized as brilliant points of light burst into existence around them. 7 ships, each one a masterpiece of crystalline engineering, emerged from what appeared to be tears in the fabric of space itself. They moved with impossible grace, their hulls shimming with colors that human eyes had never been meant to see. "This is First Speaker Xerix of the Meridian Coalition." A voice resonated directly in their minds, bypassing their ship's communication systems entirely. "We detected your approach to the beacon. Your method of travel, it is unlike anything we have encountered." Chen straightened his uniform, a habit from years of military service, before joining the research fleet. "This is Captain James Chen of the Earth vessel Curiosity. We're a research vessel, studying unusual energy signatures in this region." There was a pause, and Elena could have sworn she felt amusement in the silence before the response came. "Research vessel. Your ship, it uses controlled nuclear fusion for propulsion, contains enough computing power to simulate small universes, and employs quantum sensors we thought theoretical. Yet you call it a simple research vessel." "It's what we do," Chen replied simply. "Humanity has always been curious." The alien voice took on a more urgent tone. "Then perhaps it is fortune that brought you here. The beacon you detected, it was not meant to be found for another century. But the harmonic swarm moves faster than we predicted. They are coming, and our weapons cannot stop them." Elena's displays suddenly filled with new data as the alien ships shared their information. The images made her blood run cold. Entire solar systems consumed by what looked like living darkness, worlds reduced to hollow shells by creatures that fed on vibration itself. "We don't understand," one of the alien voices said, different from the first. "Your species achieved faster than light travel through brute force, like tearing holes in space with massive gravitational fields. Your computers process information through crude electronic switches rather than quantum crystalline matrices. Your sensors perceive reality by essentially poking it with particles. Everything about your technology is primitive, yet it works in ways ours cannot explain." Chen smiled, an expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. You mentioned these harmonic swarm creatures. Tell us more." The next few hours were filled with exchanges of information that left both sides reeling. The Meridian Coalition, it turned out, was an alliance of 7 species who had all evolved along similar technological paths, each discovering the same ancient knowledge caches left by precursor civilizations. Their technology was elegant, advanced, and completely ineffective against the swarm. "They consume energy itself," Xerix explained. "Our weapons, based on quantum harmonics and energy matrices, only make them stronger. We need alternatives." Elena, who had been quiet for most of the exchange, suddenly straightened. "Captain," she said, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "Remember that project the Defense Department shut down 5 years ago? The one they said was too crude, too primitive to be worth pursuing." Chen's eyes widened as he caught her meaning. The symphonic cannon. But that was just theoretical, a way to use focused sound waves in space by using gravity fields to propagate the vibrations, Elena finished. Primitive, crude, and exactly the kind of thing these swarm creatures might not be prepared for. The alien vessels shifted slightly, their crystalline surfaces refracting light in patterns that somehow conveyed confusion. "You propose to fight creatures that consume vibration, with vibration." "No," Elena said, a fierce grin spreading across her face. "We propose to fight them with music. Human music. The kind that no alien species has ever heard before." As she spoke, she queued up a piece on her personal device. The opening notes of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony filled the Curiosity's bridge, its famous fate knocking at the door motif echoing through the ship's halls. The alien vessels actually recoiled, their crystalline structures resonating with the unexpected power of the music. What is that?" Xyrix's mental voice was filled with wonder and something approaching fear. Chen's smile grew predatory. "That first speaker is humanity's answer to your problem. We may not have inherited the knowledge of the precursors, but we've spent thousands of years perfecting the art of making noise. And if these swarm creatures feed on vibration, then let's give them something to choke on." Elena finished. As the symphony continued to play, the humans and aliens began to plan. The war against the harmonic swarm would be fought not with quantum weapons or energy matrices, but with the accumulated musical genius of humanity, transformed into a weapon that no one, not even its creators, fully understood. The stars themselves seemed to tremble as Beethoven's masterpiece reached its crescendo, and somewhere in the darkness between the stars, the harmonic swarm stirred, sensing something new, something dangerous, something uniquely human approaching. 3 months after the encounter in the Carina Nebula, Earth's orbital shipyards hummed with unprecedented activity. The massive frame of humanity's newest warship, the HMS Beethoven, stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Unlike the sleek crystalline vessels of the Meridian Coalition that hovered nearby, the Beethoven was all hard angles and exposed structures, its hull bristling with what appeared to be massive speaker arrays. Dr. Elena Santos stood in the shipyard's control center alongside First Speaker Xyrix, whose crystalline form shifted colors in what she had learned to recognize as anxiety. "Your species built this in 3 months." The alien's mental voice carried clear disbelief. "When humanity is motivated, we work fast," Elena replied, her eyes fixed on the final calibration readings. "Though I admit, having your quantum fabrication technology helped speed things up considerably." The ship's most prominent feature was its central chamber, a massive concert hall equipped with the most sophisticated acoustic engineering humanity had ever developed. It was both a weapon and a temple to human creativity, designed to channel the raw power of Earth's greatest musical works into a force that could shatter worlds. Captain Chen, now promoted to admiral, entered the control center with Ambassador Lyra of the Meridian Coalition floating beside him. The ambassador's gaseous form swirled with patterns that indicated deep concern. "The Coalition remains uncertain about this approach," Lyra's thoughts whispered in their minds. "Our simulations suggest that using vibration against the swarm is like fighting fire with fire." "That's where you're wrong," Chen replied, pulling up a holographic display. "We're not fighting fire with fire. We're fighting fire with a supernova." He gestured to the display, which showed the results of their latest tests. Regular vibrations, even your quantum harmonics, operate on predictable patterns. Human music is different. It's mathematical chaos expressed through sound. The display shifted to show footage from their first weapons test. A small drone, built using salvaged swarm technology, hung in space. As they watched, the Beethoven's arrays powered up, and the opening movement of Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture began to propagate through the gravity fields. The drone initially absorbed the energy, growing stronger just as the coalition had warned. But then the music reached its crescendo, the famous cannon fire now transformed into actual weapon discharges. The drone's structure couldn't adapt to the rapidly changing patterns, the shifts from soft to loud, the complex interweaving of different instruments. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, each one still vibrating with the echo of human musical genius. Impressive, Xerix admitted, their crystalline form resonating slightly with the recorded music. But the actual swarm is far more adaptive than our test drones. They've consumed entire civilizations more advanced than. A klaxon cut through the air, its harsh tone causing Xerix to flicker in distress. Ambassador Lyra's gaseous form condensed in alarm. Multiple swarm signatures detected, Aria's calm voice announced. A scout cluster. They're advancing on the Proxima Centauri colony. Chen's face hardened. How convenient. Time for a field test. He turned to Elena. Doctor, is the Beethoven ready? Elena's fingers flew over the controls, running last-minute diagnostics. The main arrays are at 98% efficiency. The acoustic chamber is fully calibrated. We've loaded the ship's memory with over 10,000 years of human musical history. She paused, allowing herself a small smile. We're ready. Remarkable, Lyra whispered. You speak of your music as we speak of our most advanced quantum weapons. That's because you inherited your weapons from the precursors, Shen replied as he headed for the transit tube that would take him to the Beethoven. We built ours from scratch, note by note, generation by generation. There's power in creation, Ambassador. It's time we showed the swarm what humanity can compose. The next 12 hours were a blur of activity as the Beethoven prepared for its first real combat deployment. The coalition ships formed a defensive screen around Earth's orbital shipyards, their crystalline hulls gleaming with barely contained energy. They had seen too many worlds fall to take any chances. Elena found herself on the Beethoven's bridge, stationed at what would have been the conductor's podium in a traditional concert hall. Around her, screens displayed both tactical data and musical scores, the two merging into a new form of combat interface never before seen in the galaxy. All stations report ready, Chen announced from the captain's chair. Coalition forces are in position. He turned to Elena. Doctor, the orchestra is yours. What's our opening number? Elena's hands hovered over the controls, her mind racing through centuries of human musical achievement. They needed something powerful, something that could show both humanity's strength and its complexity. Her decision took only seconds. Holst's Mars, the bringer of war from the planet Sweet, she said, her voice firm. It seems appropriate. Chen's smile was fierce. Classic choice. All hands, battle stations. Let's show the galaxy why humans never needed precursor archives to make our mark on the universe. As the Beethoven moved out of Earth's orbit, its massive arrays beginning to pulse with the first notes of Holst's masterpiece, Elena caught sight of the coalition ships falling into formation around them. The crystalline vessels seemed to shimmer in time with the music, as if even their advanced technology couldn't help but dance to humanity's tune. The swarm waited in the darkness ahead, a void that consumed light and energy. But for the first time since they had begun their relentless expansion across the galaxy, they were about to encounter something truly alien, the artistic soul of humanity, transformed into a weapon by the very species they had dismissed as primitive. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as the music began to build, and humanity prepared to go to war with a symphony as their sword and shield. The void between Proxima Centauri and its nearest neighbor erupted with sound that had no right to exist in space. The HMS Beethoven's gravity arrays transformed the vacuum into a medium for humanity's greatest weapon, its art. Holst's Mars had given way to Shostakovich's Symphony No. 7, the Leningrad, a piece written in defiance of siege and annihilation. Swarm entities responding to the initial movement, Elena reported from her conductor station. The tactical displays showed the dark mass of the swarm writhing in patterns unlike anything they'd seen in simulations. They're synchronized with the rhythm. Admiral Chen leaned forward in his command chair, eyes fixed on the main viewer. Synchronized. Explain. Before Elena could respond, Ambassador Lyra's gaseous form swirled into visibility on the bridge, having transferred over from the nearby coalition vessel. Impossible. The aliens' thoughts resonated with shock. They're not just absorbing the vibrations, they're moving to them. The swarm cloud had indeed begun to pulse in time with Shostakovich's composition, its previously chaotic movements becoming almost choreographed. As the music swelled toward the first major crescendo, the entire cluster began to spiral in complex patterns. All stations, full power to the arrays, Chen ordered. Dr. Santos, take us into the final. Elena's hands danced across her controls, but her mind was racing. Something about the swarm's behavior didn't match their assumptions. Admiral, I don't think they're attacking. They're dancing. The revelation hit the bridge crew like a physical force. The Meridian Coalition representatives present actually recoiled, their various forms flickering with disbelief. The swarm, the great devourers of civilizations, were responding to human music not as a weapon, but as art. New contact, the sensor officer called out. Massive swarm signature emerging from fold space. The vessel that appeared dwarfed even the Beethoven. Unlike the chaotic mass of smaller swarm entities, this one had definite structure, vast arrays of what looked like crystalline filaments arranged in patterns that were hauntingly familiar to Elena's trained eye. Those patterns, she whispered, they're not random. They're musical notation, a different form than anything we use. But she looked up at Chen. Admiral, I think this is their conductor. The massive swarm vessel extended filaments of dark energy toward the Beethoven, and suddenly every mind on the bridge was filled with song. It wasn't human music. It was something older, stranger, a symphony of gravitational waves and quantum frequencies that made Elena's teeth ache and her heart soar simultaneously. They're not invaders. Ambassador Lyra's thoughts were tinged with wonder. They're artists. They've been trying to communicate through music this entire time, but our quantum harmonics were too rigid, too perfect. They needed something more. They needed human chaos. Elena finished. Our music isn't just mathematical patterns. It's emotion given form. Joy, sorrow, rage, triumph. We put our souls into our songs. The swarm's song shifted, incorporating themes from the human music they've been broadcasting. Elena watched in amazement as her displays showed the smaller swarm entities arranging themselves into structures that mimicked classical musical notation. Admiral, she said, an idea forming. Permission to try something completely insane. Chen, who had commanded a ship armed with concert halls into battle, merely nodded. Doctor, I think we passed insane a few light years back. Elena's fingers flew across her controls, pulling up a piece she had composed herself years ago, before she'd ever dreamed of space travel. It was raw, imperfect, full of the kind of emotional messiness that coalition music, derived from precise quantum mathematics, could never capture. As her composition began to play through the Beethoven's arrays, the swarm responded. Their song merged with hers, dark energy filaments weaving through human melodies in a duet that had never been heard in the history of the galaxy. They're not consuming the vibrations, one of the coalition scientists observed. They're harmonizing with them. The massive swarm vessel shifted, its structure reconfiguring until it resembled nothing so much as an enormous musical instrument. The song it produced now was neither human nor swarm, but something new, a symphony of two species reaching across the void to understand each other. All this time, Chen said softly, all these civilizations they supposedly destroyed. They were trying to start a conversation, but nobody was speaking the right language. Elena nodded, tears floating free in the zero gravity of the bridge. Until they met humans, we might be primitive by coalition standards. but we never lost the ability to speak from our hearts. The concert continued for hours, each side learning the other's musical language. The coalition representatives watched in stunned silence as humanity, the crude newcomers to galactic civilization, achieved through art what their advanced technology never could: true communication with the swarm. But in the back of Elena's mind, a worry began to form. If the swarm were artists rather than invaders, what had driven them to consume entire worlds? The answer, she suspected, lay in the darker passages of their song, hints of discord and desperation that suggested the swarm's artistic mission might be driven by something far more urgent than mere creative expression. As if sensing her thoughts, the swarm's symphony took on a warning tone. Through the universal language of music they had discovered, Elena began to understand. Something was coming. Something that made the swarm's misunderstood ravaging of worlds look like a mere prelude. The real concert, it seemed, was about to begin. The warning came too late. 3 weeks after first contact with the swarm's conductor ship, the enemy they had been fleeing arrived. They came not in ships, but in waves of absolute silence, expanding bubbles of void that consumed not just sound, but the very possibility of vibration. Elena stood at her conductor's station on the Beethoven's bridge, her hands trembling as she watched another coalition world go quiet. The displays showed the planet's surface crystallizing, all molecular motion grinding to a halt as the silence took hold. The stillness, the swarm had named them through their musical communications, ancient beings that fed not on vibration, but on its absence. They consumed entropy itself, leaving perfect, eternal stillness in their wake. Status of the evacuation. Admiral Chen's voice was hoarse. They'd been running rescue operations for 72 hours straight. The Beethoven's massive holds packed with refugees from 3 different species. 93% of the population secured, came the reply. But the stillness is advancing faster than predicted. We're losing our gravity corridor in 10 minutes. Elena's fingers danced across her controls, adjusting the massive arrays that now worked in concert with swarm harmonics to hold back the encroaching silence. The combined human-swarm music had proven effective at creating safe zones, bubbles of space where motion and life could continue. But there was a cost. Medical Bay reports another 12 cases of harmonic syndrome, the ship's doctor reported. The human nervous system wasn't designed to channel this much musical energy. We're seeing increasing cases of neural degradation. Elena felt it herself, a trembling in her hands that never quite stopped, a ringing in her ears that persisted even in sleep. The price of wielding music as a weapon was being paid in human flesh and bone. Coalition ships reporting similar effects. Ambassador Lyra's thoughts were weak, the usually vibrant gas cloud of their form looking thin and stretched. The resonance between human music and swarm harmonics is taxing on all life forms. On the main viewer, they watched as the stillness consumed another chunk of space. Where it passed, stars seemed to freeze, their light becoming crystal sharp and cold. It was beautiful in a terrible way. The perfect silence that awaited at the heat death of the universe, brought forward by eons. We can't keep this up, Chen said quietly. Every time we use the arrays at full power, we lose more crew to harmonic syndrome. The Coalition's quantum technology is failing against pure entropy, and even the swarm's natural harmonics are being overwhelmed. Elena stared at her displays, at the musical scores that had become battle plans. Something about the pattern of the stillness's advance caught her attention. They're not random, she muttered. These waves of silence, they're following a pattern. She began to pull up different pieces of music, comparing their waveforms to the advance of the stillness. Look, they're moving like anti-music. Every pattern we broadcast, they counter with its opposite. They're not just consuming sound, they're unwriting it. The revelation hit the bridge crew hard. They weren't just fighting an enemy that consumed sound. They were facing the mathematical opposite of music itself, the anti-melody that could unravel the songs that held the universe together. New contact. The sensor officer's cry was punctuated by alarms. multiple stillness nodes converging on our position. They're synchronizing. The main viewer showed it clearly. The waves of silence were no longer expanding randomly, but moving with purpose. Where they intersected, space itself seemed to crystallize, forming structures that mockingly reflected the forms of both human and swarm musical notation. "They're learning," Elena whispered. "Everything we throw at them, they analyze and counter. Our music is teaching them how to unmake creation more efficiently." The Beethoven shuddered as the first wave of anti-sound struck its shields. Around them, coalition ships began to fail, their quantum crystalline hulls growing still and brittle. Even the swarm entities were retreating, their harmonic forms disrupted by the perfect silence. "We need to fall back," Chen ordered. "Get those refugees to safety. Dr. Santos, give us everything you can from the arrays." Elena's hands moved across her controls, but her mind was racing ahead. The stillness wasn't just countering their music, it was using it as a template for destruction. Each song they played showed it new patterns to unmake. They needed something else, something. "Admiral," she said, her voice steady despite the tremors racking her body. "I have an idea, but you're not going to like it." Chen looked at her, seeing the price of their musical warfare etched in the trembling of her hands and the silver threads now running through her dark hair. "Doctor, at this point, I'm open to anything." "We've been fighting silence with sound," Elena said. "But what if that's exactly wrong? What if we need to fight silence with silence?" Ambassador Lyra's form swirled in agitation. "Impossible. The stillness consumes all absence of sound. To fight them with silence would be to give them exactly what they want." "Not if it's our silence," Elena countered. "Not if it's silence shaped by human creativity, given form by human will. The same way we turned music into a weapon, we can turn its absence into a shield." The implications slowly dawned on the bridge crew. They would have to shut down the arrays, stop all attempts at harmonic defense. They would have to face the stillness with nothing. "It's insane," Chen said softly. Then he smiled. "Which means it's perfectly in keeping with everything else we've done. Make it happen, Doctor." As Elena began the calculations for humanity's strangest weapon yet, she wondered if they had finally found the line between genius and madness. They were about to weaponize the absence of their weapon, to fight anti-music with anti-anti-music. The universe, she reflected, had never seen anything quite like human creativity. And if they survived this, it never would again. The HMS Beethoven hung motionless in space, its massive arrays dark for the first time since its launch. Around it, the combined fleet of humanity, the coalition, and the swarm waited in perfect stillness. Elena stood at her conductor station, hands hovering over controls that now commanded the absence of sound rather than its presence. "Stillness nodes approaching optimal position," the sensor officer reported, voice barely above a whisper. They had all begun speaking more quietly lately, as if practicing for what was to come. "They're forming their convergence pattern." Through the main viewer, they watched as waves of absolute silence bent space around them, forming a lattice of crystallized void. The stillness had learned from their music, learned to arrange its anti-sound in complex patterns that mimicked symphonic structure. But that was exactly what Elena had been counting on. "They're thinking like composers now," she said, her hand still steady despite the advanced harmonic syndrome that had turned her hair completely silver. "They've learned to arrange their silence in musical patterns. And that means they can be conducted," Admiral Chen finished. He looked older than his years, the strain of recent weeks etched deep in his face. "Doctor, the stage is yours." Elena took a deep breath and began the most important performance of her life. But instead of commanding sound, she orchestrated silence. The Beethoven's arrays, redesigned over the past week, began to project shaped voids, carefully crafted absences that moved through space like dark notes in an unheard symphony. "Coalition ships report ready," Ambassador Lyra's thoughts whispered in their minds, weaker than ever but still determined. Our quantum matrices are aligned with your anti-harmonics. The swarm's massive conductor ship pulsed once in acknowledgement, its own arrays reconfigured to Elena's specifications. They had all learned from each other, humans teaching aliens about imperfection and emotion, the Coalition contributing their quantum precision, the swarm offering their innate understanding of cosmic harmonies. Stillness responding to initial movement, the sensor officer reported. They're trying to consume our shaped voids, but the patterns aren't what they expect. Elena nodded, her fingers dancing across controls that now shaped nothingness itself. The stillness had learned to counter their music by studying its patterns, but they had never encountered silence that moved like music, emptiness that danced to rhythms it couldn't hear. Second movement, she commanded. The fleet moved in perfect coordination, each ship projecting its own carefully crafted void. Where these absences met, they created patterns of anti-sound that the stillness couldn't predict or counter. The effect was immediate and stunning. The crystallized space began to crack, the perfect entropy of the stillness disrupted by silence that refused to be still. It was like fighting fire with the concept of fire, like drowning water itself. It's working, Chen breathed. The stillness is trying to consume our silence, but they can't grasp it. It's too human. Elena allowed herself a small smile. The stillness had evolved to consume the absence of sound, but they had never encountered absence with intent, silence given purpose by human creativity. They were trying to devour a void that moved like a symphony. All ships, final movement, she called out. Execute pattern Cage. Named after the human composer John Cage and his famous silent piece, 433. Pattern Cage was humanity's ultimate weapon, a piece of orchestrated nothingness that moved through space like a dancing shadow. As the fleet executed the pattern, the stillness's crystalline structures began to shatter. They're trying to adapt, the sensor officer reported, attempting to match our anti-harmonic patterns, but they can't. The patterns are too chaotic, too emotional. Elena watched as her greatest composition, a symphony of silence, tore through the enemy's perfect entropy. The stillness had learned to counter music by becoming its mathematical opposite, but they couldn't counter silence that contained human soul and emotion. They couldn't consume an absence that refused to be absolute. The battle reached its crescendo as Elena conducted emptiness itself, shaping voids that moved like dancers in the dark. The stillness, unable to comprehend or consume this new form of nothing, began to collapse in on itself. Their perfect patterns of anti-sound shattered, unable to maintain coherence against silence that moved like music. Coalition ships report stillness nodes collapsing across all sectors. Ambassador Lyra's thoughts rang with wonder. The entropy wave is reversing. Stars are dancing again. Indeed, the frozen stars began to pulse once more, their light rippling with renewed vigor. The stillness confronted with the ultimate expression of human creativity. The ability to give purpose even to nothingness itself had finally met its match. As the last nodes of the stillness collapsed, Elena finally lowered her trembling hands. The price had been high. Her body would never fully recover from channeling so much harmonic energy, but they had proven something extraordinary. In the end, it wasn't humanity's technology, or even their music that had saved the galaxy. It was their ability to find meaning in emptiness, to give purpose to void, to make even silence dance. What now? Chen asked softly, watching the stars flicker back to life. Elena looked at her controls, then at the coalition ships with their quantum crystals, and the swarm with their living harmonies. Now, she said, we write a new symphony. Together. The Beethoven's arrays hummed back to life, but this time they carried something new. A melody that combined human emotion, coalition precision, and swarm harmony. It was the first notes of a galactic civilization that had learned to sing as one. And in the spaces between the notes, in the silences that now moved with purpose, the universe itself seemed to dance.